Welcome back to the shop. Today we are raiding the sewing kit. I've got a bag of standard safety pins here. I'm slicing the bag open. No point in counting them. We just need mass. We are going to attempt a canister Damascus build using this office junk as our core material. If you like turning everyday trash into hard-use steel, hit follow and stick around. Step 1 is canister prep. I'm using a mild steel square tube. I'm coating the inside with a release agent, white correction fluid or a graphite spray. Do not skip this, or the canister welds to the knife and you'll be grinding for a week. I pack the pins in loosely at first. We need to fill this volume, but we also need space for the binding agent. Now, the secret ingredient, 1095 high-carbon steel powder with a little bright nickel powder mixed in. This blue sand in the hourglass is just to remind me how long this takes. I pour the powder in and vibrate the can vigorously. You have to shake it to get that powder into every tiny void between the coiled springs of the pins. Air pockets equal flaws. Once it's packed solid, I'm welding a lid on. I'm just tacking it in place to seal the environment. And here is the most critical safety tip. You must drill a small vent hole in the cap. If there is any moisture inside and you toss a sealed can into a 1200-degree fire, it turns into a pipe bomb. We want a knife, not a shrapnel wound. Into the gas forge we go. We need to soak this for a while to ensure the heat penetrates to the center. We are looking for welding temp, around 2300 degrees, 1260 degrees C. The powder needs to become a semi-liquid matrix that fuses with the solid pins. It's a waiting game. If you pull it too early, the core will just crumble apart. Forging begins. I move to the hydraulic press. Gentle squeezes first. This is the KISS method. I'm applying pressure from all four sides to consolidate the powder without bursting the can seams. Once I feel it becoming a solid brick, I can increase the hydraulic pressure. We are turning hundreds of loose parts into one solid billet. Now, we have to skin the billet. I'm using the angle grinder to slice through the mild steel canister walls. It's like peeling a very hard, very hot banana. This is the moment of truth. If I see solid steel underneath, we won. If I see powder falling out, I'm going home. It looks rough, but solid. There are always some surface fissures with canister steel. I'm grinding out the deep cracks now so they don't fold in later. I'm welding a rebar handle back onto the billet because tongs are a nuisance for the drawing process. A solid weld here is important. You don't want the hot steel flying across the shop. Back in the fire, coat it in borax flux to prevent oxidation, and then to the power hammer. I am drawing this brick out into a usable bar stock. The power hammer creates directional flow in the steel, stretching those safety pins into long, organic streaks. This is where the pattern really gets created. We switch to the anvil for the precise work. I'm isolating the mass for the blade and establishing the tip. You can see me hammering in the distal taper, thinning the steel towards the point. I'm also forging in the primary bevels. The more I shape it here with the hammer, the less time I spend eating dust on the grinder later. I'm using the guillotine tool or a set hammer to define the shoulders of the tang. This is a hidden tang construction, so these shoulders need to be perfectly square to the spine. If they are sloppy, the guard will never seat correctly. It takes a bit of finesse to get sharp 90-degree angles on hot steel. A final straightening heat. I'm checking the spine for straightness and correcting any twists. This steel moves a lot as it cools. I cut off the rebar handle and stamp my touch mark while the steel is still soft. Now I'll let it cycle through a normalization process. Heat it up, let it air cool. This relieves the stress from the hammer. I'm cleaning up the profile on the belt grinder with a coarse 36 grit ceramic belt. I'm just refining the outline we established on the anvil. Then, I heat the blade one last time to critical temperature, non-magnetic, about 1500 degrees Celsius, and quench it in oil. This hardens the 1095 powder matrix. After tempering the blade in an oven to reduce brittleness, we move to the bench vise. I'm using a file guide with carbide faces. This allows me to file the tang shoulders perfectly flat without the file biting into the guide. This is the only way to get a seamless, gap-free fit with the guard. Rough grinding starts. I'm back on the belt grinder to clean up the scale from the heat treat. I'm careful not to generate too much heat, dipping the blade in water constantly. If I turn the edge blue, I've ruined the temper. I'm grinding in the final bevel geometry, taking it down to a thin edge. I switched to finer grit belts, 120, 220, up to 400. I'm also using a surface grinding attachment to ensure the blade faces are perfectly parallel. This is high-carbon steel, so it's hard, but it grinds cleanly. I'm looking for deep scratches from the previous belts and removing them one by one. Now I switch to hand sanding. I clamp the blade to a board and work through the grits from 400 up to 800. This removes the vertical grinder marks and leaves a satin finish. It's tedious, boring work, but it's the difference between a handmade knife and a prison shiv. Grinding, sharpening, and edge refinement. But first, the etch. I degrease the blade and dip it into ferric chloride acid. The acid eats the 1095 carbon steel faster than the nickel in the safety pins. This reveals the pattern. It's chaotic, almost like a spider web or a topographic map. It looks incredible. After neutralizing the acid, I give it a light polish to make the high spots pop. Now, let's build the guard. I have a block of solid brass. I measure the tang thickness and drill a series of holes in a line. This is called chain drilling. It removes the bulk of the material so I can get a file in there. I use a small needle file to connect the dots and square up the slot. This is a fit and check process. I file a little, try to slide the blade in, file a little more. It needs to be a press fit, so tight that I have to tap it on with a hammer. If it rattles, it's scrap. I'm polishing the face of the brass guard now because I won't be able to reach it once the handle is glued on. I take it to the buffing wheel for a mirror shine. Be careful with small parts on the buffer. BTW, if you're into knife builds and workshop chaos, hit follow for more. For the handle, I'm using a dense block of hardwood. Looks like stabilized walnut or maybe micarta. I verify the angle of the tang and drill a pilot hole. Then I use a broaching tool, basically a saw blade on a stick, to clear out the rectangular cavity for the tang. I'm cutting a piece of vulcanized fiber spacer material for a splash of color between the brass and the wood. I do a dry fit to make sure everything seats perfectly flush. No gaps allowed. Once I'm happy, I mix up the 24-hour industrial epoxy. Crafting and attaching the handle. I slather the tang, the guard, and the inside of the wood block with glue. I clamp it up vertically in the vise to keep gravity working for me. I wipe off the excess squeeze out with acetone while it's wet. Now, we wait for the cure. Once cured, I use a bandsaw to trim off the bulk of the excess wood. I draw the profile on the side of the block so I don't grind too deep. Then it's over to the belt grinder. I'm using a 36 grit belt to hog off material and start sculpting the ergonomic shape. I'm contouring the brass guard right along with the wood. The transition needs to be seamless. You shouldn't be able to feel where the metal ends and the wood begins with your fingernail. I shape a palm swell into the handle for better grip. It's starting to look like a knife now. I switch to the slack belt, the part of the belt with no metal platen behind it. This allows the belt to wrap around the handle and create smooth, organic curves. I'm constantly checking the symmetry. It's easy to grind too much on one side and end up with a lopsided handle. Now comes the hand sanding of the handle. I start at 220 grit and go up to 600. I wet the wood to raise the grain, then sand it back down. This ensures the handle stays smooth even if it gets wet later. I'm also refining the brass guard shape with thin strips of sandpaper, the shoe shine motion. I'm adding a brass pommel cap to the back. I drill and tap the end of the tang so I can screw it on. This creates a mechanical lock in addition to the glue. I shape the pommel on the grinder to match the flow of the wood. It balances the weight of the blade perfectly. Back to the buffer. I'm using a white polishing compound on a loose cotton wheel. This brings out the deep chatoyancy in the wood grain and makes the brass look like solid gold. I tape the blade up during this step because one slip on the buffer with a sharp edge can lead to a trip to the ER. I'm doing a final check on the fit and finish. I use a little oil on the handle to seal the wood and protect it from moisture. The contrast between the dark etched steel, the bright brass, and the warm wood is exactly what I was aiming for. But a pretty knife is useless if it isn't sharp. I head to the sharpening station. I'm using water stones, starting with a 1000 grit to establish the apex. I hold a consistent 20-degree angle. You can hear the stone cutting into the hardened 1095 steel. Then I move to a 3000 grit stone to polish the edge and refine the scratch pattern. Finally, I strop the edge on a piece of leather loaded with green polishing compound. This removes the microscopic burr and aligns the edge. We want this thing hair-popping sharp. I test it on my arm. Yep, bald spot achieved. That is a scary sharp edge. Let's take a minute to appreciate the pattern. You can clearly see the remnants of the safety pins, the loops, the wire, the chaotic swirls. It's creating a pattern-welded look that is completely unique. No two canister knives ever look the same. It's industrial waste turned into functional art. The handle ergonomics turned out great. The palm swell fills the hand, and the finger guard offers good protection without getting in the way. The balance point is right at the index finger, which makes the knife feel lighter than it actually is. Now, let's see if it can actually work. I've got a piece of seasoned hardwood here. I'm not holding back. I'm chopping straight into it. The blade is biting deep, throwing chips. The edge geometry is robust enough to handle the impact without rolling or chipping. The handle absorbs the shock well, no stinging in the hand. Now for the abuse test. I'm batoning the knife through a log. I'm hammering the spine with another piece of wood. This puts massive stress on the tang and the canister welds. If I had any cold shuts or bad welds from the beginning, the knife would snap in half right now. It's taking the beating perfectly. It split the log cleanly, right through a knot. That confirms our heat treat was successful. Tough but hard. I check the edge again. Still sharp enough to shave fine curls of wood. This is what you want. A tool that looks good but can survive the apocalypse. I'm cutting through some thick reinforced rubber hose just to test the slicing aggression. It glides right through. The 1095 powder provides the cutting performance, while the safety pin material adds a bit of toughness and style. It's a true composite material. Testing the knife's sharpness in action. One final paper test. Listen to that sound. Crisp, clean cuts. No tearing. This blade is a laser, from a bag of sewing supplies to a high-performance hunter. The safety pin special is complete. It's got character, it holds an edge, and it didn't explode in the forge. I'd call that a good day in the shop. The pattern is mesmerizing up close. You can stare at it for hours. If you enjoyed watching me turn Grandma's pins into a weapon, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what other weird junk I should toss in a canister next. Screws, ball bearings, maybe coins. Thanks for watching. Stay safe in your own shop, and I'll see you on the next build.